All right, so finally we come to our finishing details, and there's a few of them I'd like to talk a little bit about. One is how to deal with your lines, your black lines. Another one has to do with how to create patterns for your character, how to use masking to put different accessories on them, and then just how to do some general finishing processes. So we might skip around here a little bit, but try and stick with me. So the first thing that we're going to try and do is we're going to try and deal with these black lines. Now, black lines are not the worst thing in the whole wide world, but they do tend to flatten compositions out quite a bit. So in a professional setting, generally speaking, you might sometimes be okay with black lines if you have to get a concept out really, really quickly. But for the most part, black lines are not really desirable to have. So once you have your coloration in, these lines don't really serve much of a purpose anymore. They're really just dividers for different sections of your character. So what we want to do now is get rid of them in the nicest way that we can. One of the easiest ways to start this process is to actually just select the lines and color over them. So we'll go ahead and do that to get started with. So what you'd want to do is control click on your line layer, and then you'll end up with all of your lines selected. Now, because you have all of your lines selected, one of the nice things that you can do, if you make a new layer here, is you can color right over those lines. So for my face, for example, I might pull in kind of a rim color over here. If I control D to deselect, you can see that I've sort of got that. Do that sort of rim light on my character. I might darken this line, but make it so it's not quite black, right? Make it sort of a dark brown on the underside. Right, and you can sort of see how you get that sort of cell shaded blending. On all of this. I mean, it's already starting to look, a little bit nicer. And I can do the same sort of thing on my claw over here. I want to highlight my metal. I can do stuff like that. Maybe I want to keep this part a little bit darker. Right, you have total control over how your lines are going to end up looking. So for this project, I've gone ahead and I have sort of completed a lot of those lines, and you can sort of see how that looks. You can even do some kind of interesting things here, like I've added sort of like gold touches to this tunic. So even if you have, let's say you have all of your character lines in, let's go ahead and make these dark again on a new layer. Right. And again, we'll make this more of a golden color, like it's reflecting some of that, or picking up some of that light. On the one side here. Okay, so let's say that we have that as our starter. Now what? We still have lines. I mean, they may not be black lines, but they're still lines. So what's the best thing to do? Well, another thing that you can do, if I do a new layer here, I'm going to use actually a different type of brush, and I'm just going to blend these lines away. And the type of brush that I'm going to use is called a mixer brush. Now this is a brush that's it should be, if you click and hold on your brush tool, you'll see mixer brushes are at the bottom. And if you have the class mixer tool presets loaded, or the class mixer brushes, you should have some of these brushes to work with. So what is a mixer brush? If I use my tool preset here, I'm just going to pick this one, oil, pastel, soft, opaque. Although, again, you might choose a different one. You'll have to sort of play around with these to see which ones you like the most. Now, mixer brushes are different than regular brushes, right? If I draw on here, it just looks like a regular brush. But what I might not notice is that it's actually pulling from sort of an image square here. So just like your regular paintbrush can pick up, different different colors. If I do sample all layers here, I can pick up, you can see different parts of an image, and I can paint with that part of the image. Now you can see it slows my processor down quite a bit to do that. And we'll actually explore this a little bit later once we start maybe getting into buildings. But if you, there right next to the image here, you'll see there's a little button that has sort of a brush vacuum kind of a thing here. We're just going to turn that off, right? And what happens when we turn that off is we turn the mixer brush into kind of a blender. You'll see up at the top here there's a number of different options for wet, load, and mix, and also flow. You'll probably want to adjust these a little bit. Wet has to do with how wet you want the computer to assume the paint is on the canvas. So if your paint is 100% wet, and again, remember to turn on sample all layers here, make sure you have a fresh layer for this. What does that do? You can see that it basically blends it as if it's wet paint, which is kind of nice. Let's back that up here if we can. Oh. Let's get rid of that one. Or if it's if it's lower percent wet, you'll see that it hardly moves at all. Okay, so we're going to make it about 50% here. We're going to go in nice and close, and we know we don't really want a line here, so we're just going to kind of blend it away. Right, then we can do the same sort of thing with our mouth. Just blend it all into something that looks about right to you. Again, different mixer brushes do different things. You'll probably want to experiment with the ones that I've given you. Right, so this is how we do it. This is how we take an image that looks relatively cartoony and flat, and we just push the paint around to make it look a little bit more natural. Right? So you can already see how this is turning out. It's already starting to look much smoother, much more natural. For the sake of time, we won't go through this entire process, but for now, let's go ahead and put on some of this detail, right? So we'll turn on our blended face, and you can see that I've added some blending elsewhere in here. All right, so that is generally what we'll be doing there. And then, of course, you can add in, once you start to see those features come out a little bit more, then you can add in a little bit more paint and then add in a little bit more blending, and it'll look just fine. Okay, now another thing that we'd like to do is we want to talk a little bit about patterns. So quite separately here, I'm going to make another layer just to sort of show how you can go about doing patterns properly. Remember, it's Photoshop, it's not regular painting, so you don't have to draw your tiny little patterns right on here. You can make your patterns as large as you want, and then size them down, which is often what I do. So you could do something like this, right? Right, just do something like that. Let's take those, Control T to transform. Let's flip it upside down. Select both of them, Control E. Okay, Alt and move. Control T. Right. So say I like that pattern. What might I do with it? Well, I might take that and I might duplicate it. Right, your patterns don't have to be absolutely perfect. Right, but I could take that pattern, Control T, and we'll just size that down. And some patterns, what you'll find is as you put them on your character, maybe they look a little bit too big. So you might need to kind of make little sheets of these. Again, just kind of duplicating them, pulling out the duplication, then Control E. And you can make sort of sheets of these patterns. What I recommend doing is after you've made a pattern, basically kind of save it by duplicating the layer, turn the one off, and then you can pull this right onto your character. Now, one of the things that you might go, oh no, I'm going to have to deform this around my sleeve. I mean, maybe in some cases you're going to have the time to do that, but in other cases you may not have that kind of time. In the case of this particular project, I wouldn't worry about it too much, as we'll see. A lot of the lighting sort of does the heavy lifting for you. So in this case, say I want to put the pattern on the sleeves, right? I can go and grab, let's see here, got my auto select on. Let me grab, let's see if I can grab my sleeves. Let's turn that off. Where's my sleeve layer? Come on. Okay. This might be what you'd have to do to find it. Oh, it's just part of my full base. Okay. That's fine. That's fine. I see what I did. All right. So what I want to do then is go into my fill base here. I would click on my pattern. I would do select inverse, and then just hit the delete button. And then for the rest of this, I might just grab an eraser and erase out the parts that I don't want. You could also select other regions of your character and just hit the delete button to get rid of them. But this might just be a little bit faster for right now. Right, so if I wanted kind of a black on black pattern, that might be fine. And as you can sort of see, a lot of the lighting does a lot of the heavy lifting there. But what if I didn't want a black on black pattern? Maybe I want this this pattern to be gold, right? So what would I do? To do that, I would just control click on that. I would make a new layer above it. I'm going to grab my my airbrush and I'm going to look at where my lighting is, and that's where my gold is going to be. And you can sort of see how that looks. Right? And so you can add your patterns on just like that. Might take a little bit of finesse, but eventually you'll end up with something that is really cool. Now, maybe you don't want to do, a spotted pattern, or maybe you want to do something that's a little bit more complex. I won't go into great detail on that here, but I can show you a neat little trick that you can maybe use if you're doing something a little fancier, like filigree or flower swirly designs, something like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do a new layer. I'm going to grab a brush, and then I'm going to go up to this butterfly, which is my Symmetry tool. I'm going to click it, and let's say I want to do, for the sake of argument, let's do a dual axis, although you can obviously choose whatever axis you want. So I can resize this box as big or as small as I want, but let's just say it's big. And I can draw whatever I want. Right, say I wanted a really cool design or something for cowboy boots or something like that, right? This might be a neat way to go about getting something that looked interesting. Right, and you can make whatever designs you want. Also a nice quick way of getting circles. Right, very, very easy. And then when you're done with your symmetry, just turn your symmetry off. And again, if you wanted, you can pull these out and turn them into, maybe interlocking designs. If you were doing like wallpaper to an interior or something like that, you needed to make some wallpaper real fast, this would be a great way of doing it. This stuff looks a little too dark. You just, right. And then there you have it. Like, you could put it right over your character. And, you could apply it using maybe overlay or something like that. Now, if you wanted to adjust this, like say I wanted to put this design on this coat or on this belt, and I did want it to sort of wrap around my character a little bit, the way that I'd probably do that is I would go into Edit, Transform, and I would start probably with Distort, and I would get things generally about where I wanted them. If I see that this tunic goes below here, I might do something like that. And then I would go without hitting Enter or applying the transformation, and then I would move right to Warp. The reason that you don't want to use, don't want to stop the transformation and do it again, is it will affect the integrity of the image. It will make it look a little blurrier. Right? So you can use this tool. It's not perfect, but it's fairly malleable. And then, again, you would just go in and erase all this out. If you didn't feel like erasing it, another thing, or you wanted to adjust it again, another thing you could use is what's called masking. So for that, I would just hit this this button down here, which is your quick mask button. And what that does is it ties this layer to what's called a mask. And your mask works like this. Anything on this layer that is full white is completely opaque, and something that is full black is completely transparent. So if I change my brush to black, right, you'll see that I can actually just paint out the parts that I don't want. Now, what's the advantage to doing this? Well, the advantage is I'm not really actually erasing anything here. All of the information is still there. It's just kind of hidden behind this mask, right? So if I want, I could go in and disable this mask, and you could see that everything is still there. The other thing that I could do is turn off this this chain link, and I could actually move my mask around. I could move my mask around separately, right? And adjust exactly where it's sitting. And if I don't like what I have, I can also just delete the layer mask. Now you can do that with layers. You can also do that with entire sections. Anything that you have in your folders here. So like, for example, with this sword, one of the things that I could do is I could create a layer mask and lower the opacity just a little bit on this guy so I can see what I'm doing, and then go over, grab my brush, and I could just paint out on my mask parts where this finger is. And that way what I can do is, instead of working around the fingers, I can just paint my sword up however I want, put it in place, and then just paint out the parts of the mask. And then if a modeler asked me for a full version of this sword, I could just pull this out and turn the mask off. And then I've got my full sword. Any detail that I have on any of this would be fair game. Everything would look just right. Okay, so that's generally how we apply details. So everything that we add in for things like necklaces and swords and jewelry and patterning, it's like a small little extra art project. So when we come back, I'm going to sort of show you final techniques for presentation, and then we'll be through with this project.